Hi, I'm Brad Siegel, and this is my IOC for IB English A. The passage on Going Home by Joan Didion from 1967, published in the Saturday Evening Post, which is typically read by middle-aged to older adults. She writes this with the purpose of showing how outsiders can't relate to the bond of a family and to show how going home is important. Also, she tries to show how she's emotionally attached to her home and how other people can't explain it. The audience is pre World War II children who are now middle aged and reading this. So we start. She starts with "I'm home for my daughter's first birthday," and then when you read the rest of it, it really has nothing to do with it. But she shows how the tone should be joyous because it's there for her birthday, but she really isn't very happy. She continues on by "home" in quotes. She puts that home in quotes because the L.A. home that she's with her new family, meaning her husband and her daughter, is not her true home, and she can't really connect as well as the home she's about to talk about. And this is all in the first subject from lines 1 to 4. She kind of just sets the scene of what she has to say. And it ends on line 3 to 4. It is a vital, although troublesome, distinction. She starts to show how she's emotionally attached to her original home and how nothing can replace it. And it's a very important distinction that she makes between the two homes. Because if she doesn't make distinctions, then she can't remember her childhood memories or things like that. She shows how nothing can replace it. On line 4, it's the start of the second subject, which is her husband and how he interacts. So this goes with the purpose of how outsiders can't relate to the bond of a family, and it's also she throws back to past memories, and she uses symbols to show and prove a purpose. She starts off on line 6. When she goes home, she says, quote, "There I fall into their ways." She falls into her old ways. Obviously, that's what she says. But it seems like there's a civilized layer of her that's coming off when she goes home. And that's important because it shows how she turns into a different person and how she's become a different person once she's left her home or her childhood in the dust. And speaking of dust, on line 6, she says, "We live in dusty houses," and then in parentheses, DUST. He once wrote with his fingers on surfaces all over the house, but no one notices. He is obviously her husband. The dust symbolizes the buildup of things covering the truth. So the dust, in this case, is Didion's life. So just a simple dust off, which is her coming back home, makes her revert to its old ways, which is like the clean version. No, I mean, not when there's no dust on it, then that's the original version, and that's the original version of her, which is her like a kid, and that connects back to what I just said about falling into their own ways, because she reverts back to what she used to be like, just when this dust comes off, and it shows how her husband is trying to see through this, but he really can't. On to the next line 8 and 9. She says, "What could the Canton dessert plate mean to him, and how could he have known about the assay scales?" Or, I don't know how to say it, but assay, I think. Those are both symbols of her childhood. Usually they're just useless things that like people just have in their house. Well, obviously not anymore because we don't have them. But the older audience that she is speaking to, the pre-World War II childhood audience, they can relate with it because they may have had these, and it may connect them with their childhood as well. So there's symbols for childhood. In line 12, she starts to talk about, or this continues on from the very long sentence starting on line 6. She says people who have been booked on drunk driving charges about property. She goes on. And this booked on drunk driving charges shows how even the bad things, or it shows how there's also bad memories of her childhood. Not everything's good and happy like she hopes it would be. She shows that when she comes home, There's still a burden that's at home, and it shows why she left, or why anyone leaves, because you have to leave your home to start a new life and become a new person, while still keeping some of the same ideals. That kind of continues on for a while. But then in line 19, she talks about sale leasebacks and right of way, condemnations, and it's like they're talking in code for the yellow fields and the cottonwoods and the rivers rising and falling and the mountain roads closing when the heavy snow comes on. So that sentence is a symbol, or mostly those two words, the sale leasebacks and the right of way, condemnations. Those are symbols for family and happiness. Even though it's very random that those words trigger that, she associates it with great times, and she connects to an audience that may have like not secret words but code words that they can relate to her childhood. And also even people not in her audience, maybe younger people, they may have felt the same thing, like, oh, maybe a trip you took when you were younger. There's a word that you said the whole time, and that just reminds you of good times, like these words are reminding her of it. It's also imagery, because she describes the mountain roads and the cottonwoods and the yellow fields. So it kind of puts the audience in her shoes and looking across these fields and these mountains, and it kind of makes them happier than the bleaker tone that she just used, like with the drunk driving charges and such. She continues on in the last sentence of this paragraph on line 24. Her husband refers to, or not her husband, her brother refers to her husband as Joan's husband rather than his actual name. She shows how the people outside of her family are not the same, or they're viewed as almost outsiders, even though he's really not an outsider. And it showed the tight bond that the family's made, and how no one can break that bond and enter with just relative ease, because even the brother can't even say Joan's husband's real name. And then the next sentence right after that, at the end of 24, the very last sentence, it says marriage is the classic betrayal. First, it connects with lines 5 and 6, because she's betraying her family, and she says in line 5 and 6, there I fall into their ways, which are difficult, oblique, and deliberately inarticulate, not my husband's ways. So there she's switching from her husband's to her family's old ways. But this describes pretty much the betrayal that she did to her family, to go back into her husband's ways, which is more civilized and not as wild ways. She's kind of betraying the quote cult of the family. Obviously it's not really a cult, but like the bond that they are, she kind of betrays it when, like, anyone kind of betrays it when she gets married. But then I noticed when you take the first line of the next paragraph on line 25 and the last line, the one that I'm talking about, you could put those together. Marriage is a classic betrayal, comma, or perhaps it is not anymore. But she splits them on purpose and makes them two separate paragraphs, because it's two different ideas in one sentence, even though they can be together. So everything above marriage is a classic betrayal is her childhood and everything she betrayed when she married her husband that she's reverting back to. And then, or perhaps it is not anymore, and that's what's described later on in the second paragraph. I'll get to that soon. She hangs on the words too, almost as a cliffhanger to catch the reader back onto her subject. So even though it's not a cliffhanger because it's only just one line down, she lets the reader, like it is a cliffhanger. So she lets the reader like look forward to the rest of the passage, even though there's not much left. She goes on. This is now in the second paragraph. It's a new subject, and it's more her connection with home, like in the present time. And then she also alludes to history at the end. On line 28, she writes, in quote, I had by all objective accounts a quote normal and quote happy family situation. I think she put those words normal and happy in quotes, because it's not the normal denotation of the words. The normal denotation of the words normal obviously is something that's not unusual, and then happy, something that's joyous or something that you enjoy. But her accounts of normal and happy are different. Her interpretation is different, and so are other people's. It's kind of an open-ended quotes, because then the audience can relate, like, oh, my normal is this, my happiness is this, which is different than hers. And it also brings back her childhood memories. Then she goes on line 29. She says, I cannot talk to my family on the telephone without crying. It shows how she's emotionally attached, and this could connect to the audience, like, of people who had maybe have just left for college or just starting life on their own, and they miss home so much, that she's so sad that she's leaving. On the next line, line 30, she says, we did not fight, nothing was wrong, and yet some nameless anxiety colored the emotional charges between me and the place I came from. I think that her short sentences are effective because it gets her right to the point, before showing how she's emotionally attached to home. We did not fight, nothing was wrong. It shows like how the bond is so tight, but still like there's something inside her that's just different, from what life should normally be like. And then on the very last sentence, she says, I suspect, this is line 34, I suspect it is irrelevant to the children born in the fragmentation of World War II. This is a connection to history and an understanding of how families have changed. She might have been talking about, oh, maybe fathers or brothers went to the war and died, or there's new nuclear families that are different, and everything just kind of changed from when it was before the war to now. And the fragmentation, that word means that it's not going to go back to what it was when the audience was kids. So they kind of need to figure out a new way and a new path in their life. So in conclusion, I think she was able to achieve her purpose of showing these pre-World War II children, but now adults, how family is important, and you should be emotionally attached. But it also shows how the outsiders or people like Joan's husband can't really relate and be the same as a family. And that's it.